I'm back. Hey, this is Kevin Riles with the Real Estate of Life. Kevin Riles, thank you. I know I've been gone, but I'm back and I'm bringing you knowledge today. 5 commercial real estate acronyms you need to know. 5 commercial real estate acronyms you need to know. I'm educating, I'm teaching. I'm back. I'm back. DJ, hit that music, please.
Support for this program comes from the Digital Broadcasting Network, presenting podcasts and web series from everyday people who have an extraordinary passion to make the world a better place.
Welcome back to the Real Estate of Life with Kevin Riles. This is your host, Kevin Riles. I'm excited to be back with you. I know some of you have been getting texts and emails and said, hey man, where are you? What's been going on? Well, what had happened was this is the summer. We're shooting this episode towards the end of the summer in August of 2018. And I have been getting my edumacation on. I've been getting my edumacation on, and I know that's not correct, so it's education, but edumacation on. I have been working towards my CCIM designation, and for those of you that don't know, the CCIM designation is a certified commercial investment member. It is kind of analogous to a certified financial planner or a CPA or a professional engineer within the commercial real estate realm, and it's basically like getting another master's degree in a short period of time. And so I've been taking classes to do that. I've had to show a certain level of production. Just submitted my portfolio actually yesterday as of this taping. And so I sit for the big final exam in Chicago in October of 2018. And so I have been working on that. And plus, I just been tired, dog. I ain't gonna go front. It's just, as my daughter used to say when she was little, she would ask my wife, where was I? And my wife would say, Daddy's at work. And so my daughter just started saying, Daddy work. So Daddy work. All right, Kevin work. But I've had a great year thus far, and I'm back. The Real Estate of Life is back. Mr. Producer was just kind of giving me a hand slap saying you need to be more consistent, getting on my case, you know what I'm saying? But it's all good. He been gone too, but that's a whole nother conversation. But I saw I'm back. I'm back educating. I'm back doing what I love. My voice a little scratchy today because I'm tired and these allergies in Texas, Houston specifically, and I was in Dallas for one of the classes. Let's do better with this heat. This heat is ridiculous, dog. If you don't believe in global warming, I don't know what else you need to just come to Houston or come to Dallas. When I was in Dallas last week for this class, I came outside to leave the class at the end of the day, and my car thermostat registered 116 degrees. And so I was thinking, oh, that's probably just because it's been sitting up. I drove to my hotel. It only went down to 113. So it was 113 degrees. Come on, and then I get back to Houston thinking I'm gonna get a little relief. And it was 102, 103. So I made a joke on Facebook that said the devil was in Dallas and he told me he was on his way to Houston because it was cooler. But it was only 102, 103 degrees. But what's today's show about? I want to come back, especially since I've been in education mode, personal education mode, and talk about 5 commercial real estate acronyms everybody should know. 5 commercial real estate acronyms everyone should know. We have a tendency in this industry to kind of throw around acronyms, and if you're in the industry, of course, you probably know what they are, but if you're not in the industry, you hear us talking, you're like, what are they talking about? And so I want to kind of give you 5 acronyms that we use in commercial real estate so that you just at least know the definitions and know when people are talking about these things, what they're talking about. So the first, and I would say probably the most important acronym that we use quite a bit in commercial real estate is CAP, C-A-P. C-A-P, it stands for cap rate, capitalization rate. And so what the capitalization rate is it is a measure of return on a particular property, and it's also a measure for you to be able to compare different investment opportunities with one another. So capitalization rate is determined by dividing the net operating income by the sales price of a particular property. So if you have $10,000 of net operating income divided by $100,000 sales price, the cap rate on that is 10%. And so what does that mean? That means that if this was a cash deal and I invested $1, I would get a 10% return. But what it also shows you is if I have a 10% cap rate on one particular investment and a 9% cap rate on another, then if you just talked about cap rate, not location and all the other things that come into analyzing the property, then the cap rate, the 10% cap rate is better. Couple things I want to say about cap rate is it's not the ultimate measure though. There are other measures of whether an investment is good or not. And the other thing is that cap rate can also tell you the risk of a property. The higher the cap rate, most of the time, the riskier the investment, right? The higher the cap rate, the riskier the investment. Why? Sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes you just, hey, I got a good deal because the property is making a really good cash flow and I got a good sales price. So it's not always the case, but on average, especially in multifamily, the higher the cap rate, typically the riskier the investment. It might be a C-class property. It might be what we call a value-add property that needs work. So just remember that as well. And then cap rate is an incomplete measure of investment because, again, it's just measuring sales price as a ratio of the net operating income. And so it doesn't measure any type of internal return or other things. So, but when you hear somebody say, what's the cap, then they're asking what's the return on $1 invested in that particular property. Now, the lower the cap rate, typically, one, the higher the price of the property, but two, the less risky on average the property. Again, that's not always the case. Sometimes properties are just overpriced. Remember, the ratio is net operating income over sales price. So the higher your sales price at that bottom number, the lower the cap rate. And typically you see lower cap rates in newer properties, in A-class properties, things of that nature. And so, or properties that are, for instance, if it's a bank property that's being leased out by a bank and a commercial broker is trying to sell it, if it's a national bank, a national credit tenant, then that's a safer investment because that stream of income, that lease payment is pretty much guaranteed. So you're going to see a 4 or 5% cap. It's like a bond almost. Versus if it's a mom and pop tenant, the cap rate may be 9, 10, or 11% because that's a riskier type of tenant because it's a mom and pop tenant. So cap rate, CAP is your first acronym. All right. And I could do a podcast episode on each one of these in and of itself, but I just wanted to kind of give you a primer here. So the next acronym is NOI, net operating income. Net operating income. So net operating income is your gross revenue, right? Gross meaning that it hasn't been touched by any expenses, minus your expenses equals your net operating income. So your gross revenue, how much rent a particular property is bringing in, minus the expenses, the taxes, the insurance, any repairs, things of that nature. And that gives you a number called an NOI. Why is NOI important? Because NOI is really why you invest. It is the income that a property is producing. So knowing what the net operating income is extremely important. I have clients that call me and say, oh man, this property is making a lot of money, but they're talking about the gross. They're not talking about the net. And I said, well, hey, have you looked at the net operating income? Oh yeah, it's this. And I'm like, no, that's the gross. You haven't taken out any expenses. So you have to look at the expenses. Why is that important? Because that's literally how much income that the property is making. And that NOI, if you have a loan, needs to not only, once you get to NOI, I should say, that needs to service the debt on that particular property as well, and hopefully still have NOI after debt service so that you have money to take home or put in your bank account. So net operating income, out of all the things I'll talk about in this podcast, is the most important because that ultimately is why you're investing in a commercial property, is for the net operating income. All right. So NOI. So we've gone CAP, CAP, NOI, net operating income. The next one is IRR. No, they don't call it that. I just thought that, that's how people from Dallas talk, Mr. Producer. Is the orange, some people in Dallas going to be mad when they listen to this, but it's true. Y'all kind of put those R's out kind of real long. But IRR, internal rate of return. Internal rate of return internal rate of return. So internal rate of return is once my dollar is actually in the investment. In other words, once I've actually purchased the property, what is the return on the dollars spent inside the investment? The calculation for IRR is a little bit more complicated than I want to get into as far as the actual formula. But essentially, we also call internal rate of return the hurdle rate. What is once my dollar's in the investment, right? Once I've actually put my $10,000 or $100,000 or $1 million in, what is the annual return of my dollar once it's actually in the investment? And that's important because your IRR, you could have a really good initial return, and I'll talk about the next in one of the acronyms as far as your first year return. But what happens after that first year? What type of return am I getting? And so a lot of decisions, most professional real estate investors, brokers, use IRR actually as the ultimate decision point for making investments because they really want to know, because IRR takes in consideration, IRR takes in consideration the actual cash flows over time. It's not a snapshot. So IRR, you can calculate at any time and take the cash flows over time and see what happens. So it is literally, if you think about it, once I'm actually inside the box of the investment, what type of return am I getting, right? And it looks like Mr. Producer's going to have to hit the cough button because, oh gosh. So yes. And so with that being said, and if I'm coughing in your ear when you're working out, I apologize. But something just got into me. So internal rate of return is important, right? So the next one is DSCR. DSCR, your debt service coverage ratio. Your debt service coverage ratio. And so what your debt service coverage ratio is your lender will look and see how much of income is attributed to the debt on this particular property. And they typically have a guideline that says the property needs to make at least 20% more or 25% more than the debt service. Meaning that if your debt service is $1,000 a month, then the property needs to be making $1,200 or $1,250 or $1,300 a month. In other words, it needs to not only cover the debt service, but also make more than that for a cushion, right? So you'll hear lenders say our debt service coverage ratio, or DSCR, is 1.2 or 1.25 or 1.3. And that means that for every dollar if it's 1.2, if every dollar the property makes, then you need to make 20% more to cover our debt to make us feel comfortable in doing a loan. So if you think about it in the house term, it's your debt to income ratio. For those of you that are familiar with residential, it's your that's your commercial version of the debt to income ratio. It's a very important acronym because if you're getting debt on a particular property, your debt service ratio is how a lender will make a decision ultimately whether to lend on that property or not. And that debt service ratio is based on your NOI, net operating income, right? And so you can see how these start tacking onto each other. And your NOI is based on your cap rate is based on your NOI. So you have all of these particular figures. And so therefore, I would just tell you that debt service coverage ratio is something again, like debt to income ratio in a residential setting, that is probably the second most important next to NOI, right? And then finally, ROI, right? ROI is return on investment. Return on investment. So I talked about internal rate of return. Once you've actually put money into an investment, what is it returning on an annual basis? Your ROI, also known as your cash on cash return, is in that first year, if I put $10,000, how much money do I get back? And there's a ratio that says that's my cash on cash return on my return on investment. So I've invested $10,000. I got out. And so after all my expenses, I made $5,000. So my return on investment is 50% in that particular case, right? 50%. Or I invested $10,000. After all my expenses, I made $2,000 in that first year. So my return on investment is 20%. right? And so that's a quick measure of that first year of investment. And a lot of people like to use that to make investment decisions. And it is one of the factors that you can use. But remember, you're only really capturing that first year, right? You're not capturing over time. So if you look at all these acronyms from a commercial standpoint, CAP, capitalization rate, NOI, net operating income, IRR, internal rate of return, DSCR, debt service coverage ratio, ROI, return on investment. You can see that they're all interrelated. NOI is related to CAP, it's related to IRR, it's related to debt service coverage ratio, and it's related to ROI, right? Your IRR captures your NOI. Your CAP is a version of or a precursor to your IRR. So what I wanted to do was just give you a primer, because if you're looking at investing in commercial real estate, no matter if it's retail, industrial, multifamily, any income producing property, these are probably the 5 acronyms that are used the most. And so I think you need to have the vocabulary to be able to communicate that, hey, my goal is to have a IRR of 10%. Remember, I called IRR hurdle rate. Or if I didn't say that, I'm saying it now. A lot of professional investors in commercial real estate, they have a IRR goal, meaning that once they've invested in the property, they want it to return over 10%. In fact, some people call the IRR a go, no-go rate. In other words, if you have a certain return, ongoing return requirement, if you do your analysis and your IRR is below that requirement, it's a no-go. If it's above, it's a go. And so these are important vocabulary for you to know, so that as you guys, whether you're a newbie or you've maybe bought your first commercial investment property, or you call my office and say, hey, Kevin, I'm really wanting to invest in commercial real estate, and we start talking, and I start talking about cap rates and NOI, these are just important terms that you need to know. So again, 5 commercial real estate acronyms that you need to know. They'll make you smarter, make you better, make you a better investor. I'm back. The real estate of life is back. I'm tired, but I'm back. Daddy work. I'll see you guys next week. Hey, thanks for listening as always. Do you have questions about any of the topics I'm talking about? If you have questions, let me know. Email me at kevin@kevinriles.com. Again, that's kevin@kevinriles.com. I'm going to do a podcast just on the questions that you guys are sending me. So feel free to send them to me. Again, that's kevin@kevinriles.com.